Laser Pulse is brought to you by BW Tech Medical, a leader in light-based devices for over 30 years. Whether you're a researcher or a manufacturer, we help turn ideas into reality. Learn more at www.bwtechmed.com.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Laser Pulse, a space for thought leaders from a variety of disciplines to come together and discuss many facets of light in medicine. Today's topic, understanding laser regulations and standards and why they matter to you. And we have two eminently well-qualified guests to address this topic. Joining my co-host, Dr. Brian Pryor, and I today is Dr. Ron Riegel, AIMLA President, equine vet, somebody who's lectured all over the world on the use of light in veterinary medicine and co-edited the first laser therapy handbook. Also, we're very lucky today to have a friend and colleague from many years, David Bothner, Vice President of Business and Product Development at Noir, the largest US manufacturer of safety eyewear. David's been involved in this field for nearly 3 decades. He sits on the ISO and ANSI standards safety committees, and his dedication has really been to safety as a culture, not simply as a compliance. So we're delighted to have both of you here today. And as always, I'm joined by Dr. Brian Pryor, researcher, scientist, entrepreneur, founder of LightCure, current CEO at BW Tech Medical. Brian, why don't you introduce our two guests in some depth, and perhaps between the three of you, we could help our audience understand this Venn diagram of regulatory guidance, legally mandated things, and best practice. How do we sort all that out to make a safe and well-educated audience?
Yeah, that's great. And thanks. I echo Andy's sentiment. Thanks for joining us. Two real experts in the field and two friends, right? We've known each other, I think, for me and David go way back to laser hair removal days, designing eyewear for various lasers and all kinds of new applications and other things. And Ron and I go way back to, I think the first time I even seen a horse, Ron was trying to tell me not to stand behind it when we were treating it, and saved me quite a bit. So it's been a great kind of run for us and friends and colleagues for sure. Ron, you have a lot of experience in lasers, right? For a long, long time. Always, I think, looked up to you as being one, not scared of innovation, but trying things that have been used in different fields and putting it to use in the veterinarian profession. So why don't you give us kind of a little background of your kind of entree to lasers and what got you interested?
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on this talk here, because I do have a lot to share. I have a lot to, share with my colleagues and anybody else who's interested. But I first bought my first laser in 1979. Now, I had graduated in the spring of 79. So this was about the fall, and I was working at the racetrack, and Dr. Kane, who was one of the founding fathers of equine acupuncture, was using a laser. And I was just fascinated that he was able to stimulate acupuncture points without a needle. And, he was older and a lot of experience. And, I kept asking him questions. So about 5 or 6 weeks later, he said, I'm going to go to China and I'm going to teach, but I'm also going to buy a laser. Do you want one? So being out of school, not knowing anything, I said, that would be great. So 3 weeks goes by, box comes to my house, pretty big cardboard box. And I opened it up, and on top it had a bill for $3,500. And I thought, uh-oh. That dumbass, I didn't ask the price of this thing. So anyway, I hid that from my wife for as long as possible. And then also my instructions were in Chinese. So I thought, well, I got a lot to learn here. So luckily, Dr. Kane mentored me and took me under his wing. And we discovered a bunch of things together. But I was just fascinated by the fact that we could get a physiological response or a clinical response out of the patients just using light. So about 1980, I moved up. I thought, well, I'm getting some results with this 1 milliwatt, even though I'm just stimulating acupuncture points. And at that time, they'd come out with a 5 milliwatt laser. So I bought one of those and I thought, well, this should be 5 times better than what I had the first time. And then, the years went by, I went up to 10 milliwatts and then 20 milliwatts and then made the big jump in 96 to a 500 milliwatt laser. Now I think this has got to be working. And so I do, but got to remember back then, we were just then discovering the mechanism of action. We didn't really know the versatility of the therapy, but I was trial and erroring it. A lot of times what I tell people in an hour lecture took me years to try to figure out on my own. And then luckily I had people like Brian and Andy and David around to help enlighten me on some of the things that I didn't know, and that helped a lot. But anyway, so I then fast forward another 10 years and I was asked by B&W Tech, Dr. Sean Wang. All of a sudden, I got a phone call from this guy asking me to come and take a prototype home. So I take a prototype home, I meet with him, and I mean, this guy is speaking physics that I had no idea what he was talking about half the time. I asked him to repeat things several times. He became a little frustrated, but he still let me walk out of there with a 13-watt laser. I took it home, and this is what's really odd. The very next day, I went to one of my better barns and there was a Grand Prix jumper there, probably well over $500,000 in value, that had basically had an injury on that Sunday at the show. So 2 days ago. And so when I asked the owner and trainer how it was doing, she said, well, I broke it. She shows me the ultrasound and we look at it. And I thought, boy, and she had all the instructions from the vet at the show that told her what to do. And I was thinking, man, what a bummer. Well, driving away later that day, while I was driving, I thought, this would be the perfect opportunity to see if this new laser works. So I call her up and I'm going to be back the next morning. And I go there and I show her how to do it. And she was a very good trainer. She was a very good owner. She was able to do a lot of the treatments herself after I showed her. But of course, I showed up 24 hours after the first one. And we had a fantastic response. In fact, in just 8 weeks, that horse was not only back training, but a next show that it came up, it was still in the same class of horses and it was placed third. Now, this horse, when they have a tear in the tendon like this horse had, that's a season-ending, if not a career-ending injury. But this one healed like all on its own. And I mean, I confirmed that. I actually even sent it for a second opinion on the ultrasound to make sure I was right in reading the ultrasound. But I thought, now that got my interest. So, of course, I called Dr. Wang up and I said, I may need to keep this for a while because, this is going to show me all kinds of things. And so gradually over the years, I discovered the versatility of it. And again, that's what really got me thinking. I mean, here we can do something without being intrusive into the body. We are non-invasive. We can do it without any pharmacological help, no side effects whatsoever. And just all good things that can happen. I mean, you can't hardly overdose it. You can't hardly do it wrong. And again, so come up around 2012, by that time I had, known Brian there, and I'd known Annie for quite a while. And we were sitting around talking one day, and we were just like kind of, thinking about what's next or what should we do next. And I said, well, you know what the problem is? I said, we don't have any laser education. All the companies besides yours want to sell a laser, but they don't want to do any of the education. We need somewhere where people can get educated on how to use these safely. Number one, there was no safety courses back then. They need to know how to use the right technique, need to use, so at that meeting, we basically kicked around the idea and thus AMLA was formed, the American Institute of Medical Laser Applications, with the basis that we would provide it non-denominational education for whoever wanted to hear it. And that's basically how I went from there. And it wasn't just for veterinarians. We had chiropractic courses, physical therapists taking it. And again, the biggest crux, though, was for safety and to follow the state regulations for this.
Yeah, that's great. And I think AMLA's been, wildly used throughout veterinarian, chiropractic, physical therapists, orthopedics, right, as kind of not only how to treat, but how to do it safely, like you said, and even a course on, laser safety officers for veterinarians. So that's been very well received. David, I know you've been involved in the laser game for many, many years. It's interesting kind of on the front of laser safety, you see a lot of things people are in development, right? Because they need safety goggles for this, in different wavelengths and other things. So you've seen a lot. What has been your journey kind of through all of this, starting out in especially medical, right? And maybe how some things in industry cross over to help us be safer in medical.
Well, sure. Again, let me just start by saying thanks a lot for bringing me on, guys. I relish any time with the three of you that I get, and to do so in that we can sort of share that sort of delightful. So nice afternoon. I appreciate it. I love you guys. I got into laser safety, into the business of laser safety, sort of just the way life happens, which is also the way analogous for how the field has grown. So I came into a family-owned business that was making sunglasses for the visually impaired, a very niche kind of eyewear, about almost 30 years ago, because there was a call from customers happened to be in the ophthalmic market at the time, that were finding a new application for lasers for actually doing retinal treatment, and needed safety eyewear for staff and physicians. And we happen to be able to probably do that. My whole career has been, well, we probably can do that at the cusp of the development of the field. So you and I have, as you mentioned, designed eyewear on the fly. I'm in the engineering room mixing dyes, because we make absorptive dyed laser eyewear that the energy is absorbed in the goggles. Making eyewear on the fly for a brand new laser, at the time, a pretty brand new laser application, the one that runs that 13-watt laser that's at a couple different wavelengths that really hasn't been combined in this particular way to be used by physicians or chiropractors or vets in a sort of in an open environment. And so we needed eyewear that they could see through and be protected by. And throughout the development of lasers, it is the trajectory. Someone gets a beam, they get a wavelength, they get some power in it, they look at what can we do with this, and suddenly people are using this laser sort of off-label. And we have been making eyewear for 30 years that fills that need. And it's exciting. I mean, it's thrilling to be involved in the science, be involved in the medicine, and be providing a solution that helps real people do real cool things, like treating injured horses so they jump in the next event. So it's been a blast.
And Ron, what have you seen kind of through your AIMLA training and for the safety requirements, the biggest thing people need to learn, and what regulations? I know that there are regulations, right? OSHA has mandates, and some states are starting to even increase their demand. So kind of what have you seen is the need practically, and then what is more of the need kind of for regulatory compliance?
Well, in my journey of going through adopting different lasers and increasing the power all the time and using different wavelengths and everything, it wasn't up until I met Dr. Wang that I was even aware that there was an eye danger. I mean, yeah, we don't know better than to look at a laser right on the head of it, but I didn't realize about a reflective or anything else. So the safety part was the thing that really hit home, because I was thinking about all the things and going through the anatomy of the eye, knowing that any beam that basically enters your eye gets multiplied by 100 times its strength until it hits the retina. So it takes a millisecond, a nanosecond, to cause damage to the retina, which is a horrible thing. So yes, so that was the number one thing that I thought about. And of course, then after that was basically clinical applications and techniques, and people wanted to know the science, they wanted to know the mechanism of action, but the safety thing is what really started it all. And again, then like I said, I met David the first time. We had a talk, and I met him at a trade show. And I remember this almost like it was yesterday. A gentleman walked up to him and he said, "I want a pair of protective eyewear that will block all wavelengths." And I thought, that's called a shade. Anyway, but David, without breaking a stride or anything else, he said, "Well, we have some here. that'll do that. And the optic density was unbelievable, and you couldn't see through them. I'm thinking, and he kept a straight face, helped the guy, answered his questions and everything else. But I thought, I never thought about that. We not only have to protect our eyes, but we have to be able to see through them to work. So this was, and then he was telling me how much engineering and how much, science went into just developing the protective eyewear. I mean, it was, and I think, and if I remember this correctly, he told me he put 7 coatings on the pair that I had in my hands. And I thought 7 coatings. And then, and then I go into practices over the years and I'll see them with cracks on them. I'll see them with scratched lenses where somebody just put them on the counter or knocked them on the floor and kicked them around or something like that. And I think people just don't understand that. But that's the safety thing was basically what my crux was. And then to get it race approved so it counts as continuing education for all the veterinarians, because that's really what they want. They don't think so much as safety, they think about it as a requirement. And unfortunately, it should not be a requirement. It should be common sense. It should be something that I want to protect my employees, I want to protect my patients, I want to protect anybody that's in the environment there against any possible, not just danger to the eyes, but also, danger to the dermis or, electrical problems. I mean, I walked in one time and saw somebody have one of those giant Slurpees right on top of their laser. And all I could think of was that thing spilling over the top of the laser and the disaster that would cause. And the electric outlet was right behind it. So I thought this is going to be good. So I didn't allow him to do it. I actually warned him about that. But again, that was what really was the crux of starting it, and then it grew from there, and it grew from into different applications, even the business aspect of how to basically integrate laser therapy into your practice, all those things.
Yeah,
If I could,
that's a good point that laser eyewear is not the only protection, right? I mean, it's important, right? Didn't get me right, but there's other things that in a course. And David, I know you're involved with many committees, right, and have been helping shape some of the education mandate. And I think being a practical, I count you as a very practical person, right? Not caught up in the science, but how are people actually going to use this and not hate it because of the jargon? So maybe give us some ways on what the regulatory is looking at to make it usable and what benefit will kind of a user, right? A vet tech or a physician's assistant, what benefit would they get of a laser safety training?
well, it's actually really important to say that laser safety eyewear is not the it's not it we like to say, as much as I love to sell laser eyewear, it is the last mechanism of defense, right? Safety, if you're relying on your safety eyewear to protect you, a lot of things have already been looked over. And some of the standards that exist, and I sit on the committee for ANSI for Z136 and the ISO committee, and I'm very familiar with the European regulations. And a lot of those are built around dense science or concepts of the nominal ocular hazard distance and the classes of lasers, right? That they are classified in certain kinds of danger around each class. And I like to say that, and I think a good education like AIMLA does, is brings it down to a level of what is required and what makes a safe and working environment, right? So safety culture. The standards they call out class 1 through 3 or 1 through the 1 and M1, 1M2 are all sort of eye safe. They're the laser pointers that you're used to using in a presentation or conference environment. You get into the 3Rs and 3Bs. These are higher powered lasers. Those are the ones that vets are using and chiropractors and physical therapists are using. They are real dangerous systems if you get a direct or reflected exposure. And then there are larger, higher power material processing lasers that probably aren't our concern here. The standards do put a lot of muck and jargon around them. And a good course, like I've sat through Ron's course before, and it's entertaining and educational, brings some of that down to the practical level. Some of it is common sense. We still need to be reminded of it. We still need to know non-beam hazards. We still need to know reflections. We still need to know that everyone in the room needs to have eyewear on. and hearing a good course present that, I think is critical. I don't know how much depth you'd have me dig into some of this, but there are anecdotes. I mean, I guess I call them anecdotes because I don't try to teach each case study, but there are situations I've heard, we don't use eyewear. We're working with a fiber laser and we're doing a urinary procedure. And so we don't need eyewear. The laser's up in the body. Well, I can name a couple cases where the fiber broke and the people in the room are now exposed to this beam that is, well, permanent eye risk if it hits them, right? And it's not just a simple optical table where somebody's not wearing the eyewear and they're looking at and a reflection off a shiny piece of metal. It can be even if for aesthetic treatments where the patient has a metal eye cup on, if that isn't well fitting, you can get a reflection off the bone of the face up and then off the inside and into the pupil, right? So
is it safe to say that if you're using a laser on a patient, the patient and the practitioner should have some kind of eye safety on?
Absolutely. I mean, any laser that is effective has enough power to be dangerous if you get an accidental exposure to the eye, to the pupil.
Yeah, but
period.
David, Brian and I were in a practice a couple of weeks ago up in Massachusetts, and she had therapy laser. She had a laser for various aesthetic procedures, and I think there's a feeling that all laser glasses will protect you from all different lasers, and it was important for us to point out that never the twain shall meet. Can you explain a little bit about that, about just how that difference is? And I'll just add an anecdote in that my wife had a little laser bracelet done at a jeweler's out in a market, and they said, "Oh yeah, now you've got sunglasses on, so you don't have to wear these." She had sunglasses on, and they zapped the little bracelet on. So just that, I think that's a common perception. So can you go into a little bit of the technicalities around building lenses with filters and things?
Oh, I sure can, because a common anecdote is that someone working with a CO2 laser will say, "Well, I have glasses on, and my glasses block those." And my question to them is, "Are you sure? Would you actually risk your own eyes?" You are, in fact, risking your own eyes on assumption that pair of eyewear is safe. Laser safety eyewear is required to list on the lens what wavelength and at what protection level. And no matter which standard we're looking at, the Europeans use a different one, but in the United States, ANSI requires it must say what wavelength and what optical density, which is a logarithmic scale of protection. So generally, the bigger the number, the more protection you have. And that's good, right? Most eye injuries, almost every eye injury that has ever happened is because someone was not wearing goggles, or they were wearing the wrong goggles, or they were wearing incorrectly fitting goggles, period. So we make eyewear primarily that uses absorptive dyes that are narrow band absorption at the wavelength of the laser and let everything else through, so that you're protected from the beam or a range of beams, and you can see everything else. You can see tissue, you can see the wound that you're working on, you can see the blinking lights on the machine to know that you're setting the values correctly. You can talk to the patient, or you can see your working environment. Not every pair of eyewear covers every single wavelength. When Ron's joke was, I showed that guy a stainless steel pair of protective eyewears for patients. It's like, yep, this one blocked everything. You can't see through it. It's useless, right? It's a joke I make all the time. So wavelength, optical density tied to the laser. So in that environment where there's a therapy laser or two, and there's a surgical laser, or in a dermatologist's office where you have a hair, a skin, you can have a number of different lasers. There needs to be enough training that everyone knows which eyewear they're putting on to be protected for the laser that they're using. And that piece of safety culture, that piece of education has to happen in the practice for everyone who's in the room. And there has to be somebody in charge of that. I hate to be like, ooh, scary, you have to, but you have to have somebody in the practice that on site that says, here are the operating procedures for this system. It is a great system. It will do quote unquote magic medicine, but you need to use it safely. And so
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think when you have someone that owns either that laser or all of the lasers in a practice, right? They become the laser go-to person for maintenance. There's a lot of things to consider, not just the safety, but just simple things on how to train new staff when there's turnover. So that's I have a funny story. When I first started, maybe not first started, but I was developing a user interface for a laser on my computer, right? Just trying different colors. And it was very late. I worked late at night, and I was sitting on the couch with a pair of pink glasses on, staring at my computer because you don't recognize when you're designing a laser, you need to wear the goggles because people that are using them when they're using your laser are wearing the goggles. And my wife came out like in the middle of the night and was like, "What are you doing?" Looking at the screen with pink goggles on. So, but it's important. I think there's a lot more that goes to it. And fortunately, we have companies like yours who take it, at a different level. And manufacturers are providing those goggles, to companies.
yeah,
So
and it's not even just the right filter that is important to wear, the right lens to wear. It also needs to be a frame that fits well, that can be worn over glasses or not worn over glasses. But I also think, I know this, I guess, that people are inclined to wear eyewear that they think they look good in, that fits them well and they feel good in. They'll be more compliant. So we offer a lot of different frame styles. Some of them fit different people, different face structures differently. And I know that if someone likes the eyewear, if they've chosen it, they care about it, they take care of it, and they'll be more likely to wear it. Because safety culture is all about compliance, right? You can certainly teach somebody who's doing a treatment on animals, they've learned, I need to do this safely. They go into that room with just the animal. Are they practicing what they've been taught? Compliance, how do you get people to comply? And you can't scare them into complying, right? You can't sort of bribe them into complying. You need to encourage them to want to comply. And so that's one of the hardest things to do about safety and building a good safety culture. And it's just stressing the importance. And often it is, I like to think the more people in the room, the better. But I don't.
and even for dogs, cats, horses, right? I mean, that's important as well. I think, when in the early companion days, we were the first one that provided any eyewear, and we contracted your company, or we found things that fit. We contracted your company to make special lenses and now it's evolved more to a product that you guys have. But Ron, what have you seen putting these goggles on a dog, right? Or on a cat? I mean, I've seen a picture over the weekend from Easter, someone posted of the safety glasses on a rabbit, right? They were treating a rabbit for some therapy and they had the pet specs on a rabbit. So, but is it easy to get on the animals if they don't put them on? What are your alternatives? Like, kind of talk us through that.
Well, that's a very good question that I get all the time, actually, because a lot of the animals, are not compliant. They don't want to wear anything, especially. I always say we should have a contest. David, you might want to help judge this on who can put a pair of protective eyewear on a cat the fastest, because that's always an entertaining little thing that I see. And then when they struggle, I finally tell them, that he asked me about alternatives, and I have a lot of alternatives because, for example, when we first started doing the horses, one of the first things Brian asked me, he says, well, how are we going to protect their eyes? And I said, well, horses will turn around and look at what you're doing. And the chance for reflecting off my wedding ring, for example, or reflecting off my wristwatch, or reflecting off their horseshoe is something that could happen. So we first came up with a set of blinkers, which is a thing that you pair a piece of tack that you use when racing, but we also came up with a lot of, and we're testing different materials, and we found out that black terry cloth towels that are, they're not just doubled over, but quadrupled over, that they pretty much stop, but you still have to control the animal from that. Being able to look at it. That's important. And David alluded to that at the very beginning. These are not a way of defending. This is your last line of defense. So controlling of the animal's head and everything else, but a lot of the dogs, a lot of the animals, if you use black cloth or you use something else like the metal shields that he talked about, sometimes those are a lot easier to use than they are to put, basically the protective eyewear on them. But the protective eyewear on the canine, for example, I bet you 90% of them, it's not that hard to do. You just have to have some patience. And then the dogs will do it. They'll wear them, and they wear them well. But the cats is another story. And then the horses, of course, a lot of times they're in a place where you have somebody holding them, and you can make sure that the person that's holding them is wearing protective eyewear, but also that the horse is not looking. Horses look to the side. They don't, unless they turn their head, they can't really, line up their eye to the beam itself. But that's always a challenge. But cloth, black cloth, thick black cloth, thick black felt, I've used a lot. And again, then when they get dirty, you can either wash them or throw them out and get a new one. So it's, it's sterile. I mean, not sterile, but it's sanitary to use all the time and repeatedly. So those were my go-to things. So
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think, important, right? Because if you can't get them on, just don't give up. You need to have someone help, right? Like David said, more people in the room can help. So a laser safety officer kind of sounds scary, right? Or it sounds like, oh my gosh, I have to hire another full-time employee. Maybe David, why don't you start and Ron chime in. What are the roles of a laser safety officer, and what can people expect?
Well, I don't think in the environments we're talking about, it's not like we're at Lawrence Livermore National Lab where they're doing cold fusion with 162 lasers across a campus larger than, several Costco's. That instance, you probably have to have somebody who has been trained and trained and trained. In the environment whether it's a veterinary or a physical therapy situation environment, that has a handful of lasers, it's going to take somebody to care enough to learn, and then to care enough to teach that, and I hate the word enforce because it just doesn't fit with the common sense way of approaching being safe. If you're in a kitchen and of a restaurant, there are rules about how knives are used, not because everyone needs to be careful, because everyone needs to be careful, but the risk isn't, bad analogy. A laser safety officer takes a course. It's 3 hours, or maybe it's a day, or maybe it can be done in an hour and a half, depending on how many lasers you have, really, how deep you need to know. The manufacturers of the system teach you how, both in the documentation with the system and hopefully with the training you get when you buy a laser from a reputable company. Teach you the principles and the practice for that system. You understand the concepts of where is the hazard zone. The hazard zone is generally in a treatment room. So does it have a window? Well, if it has a window, it probably, you learn that it might need a laser film or a laser protective screen on the window. If it doesn't have a window, we're just talking about a room. The beam isn't going to leave that room. So what do you need to be careful of? Non-beam hazard. So the number of things, it's not real science. You're not going to have to calculate what is the risk of, the maximum permissible exposure. This information is pretty readily accessible. You have a couple different lasers. So somebody learns this. They get an accreditation for it. They get a little diploma that can go by their desk. Hopefully they get a little bonus, right? Or they get a little special title, and people feel good about their, improving themselves. And then you just make sure you can just police, again, not a word I like, just make sure that people who are using lasers are trained to use the lasers and use it as they were trained. And then you just reap the rewards of the benefits that treatment provides. And then you have a sense of fulfillment, and you start the day again. It's a great thing.
Yeah, that's great. And I think liability as well, right? I think that the office is safe, right? And they don't have to worry about something that could be, and it's an avoidable problem, right? Just do it. Ron, on the vet side, on the laser safety officer that you have on AIMLA, who do you see typically taking that class? Who in the practice, and what else do they learn? Or maybe add on to David, how long does it take?
Okay. That's a very good question, and a question I get asked all the time. So I kind of have an answer in the can here. uh, because number one, in fact, I don't know of any veterinarian who is the laser safety officer for his own practice. They usually delegate that to one of two people, either one of their very good technicians or assistants or nurses, or the practice manager. And it has to be a person, what I stress to them, it has to be a person that, number one, is familiar with lasers, knows everything about it, takes the course, gets certified. But then, David brought up a good point about force or threaten or whatever. I always say you've got to love your employees into doing it, because they have to understand. If they understand and you're patient about teaching them, they will do it because it's common sense. So you love them into following the guidelines that you have because you're familiar with all those guidelines after taking the course. And then, basically it's an inspection of the equipment to make sure that, like, I find every once in a while, I'll find a pair of eyewear that has a crack in them, are not, are basically worthless with that crack. And a lot of times, for some reason, it's right down the center of the lens. And then last but not least, with the state requirements and the OSHA requirements, there's documentation of when the laser was used, on who it was used, and at what strength it was used. So it's a threefold thing. You have to know it, you have to be able to teach it, you have to be able to inspect all the things, and then of course document the thing. And again, I'd say 90+% of them are technicians, the rest are practice managers or some other employee or whatever. But it's somebody who's passionate enough about it to love the rest of the staff to follow, because and the turnover you mentioned earlier is so important these days, because you'll have somebody that they'll take the course and they'll get certified, and then they'll have a laser safety officer, and they educate several technicians on how to use a therapy laser, for example. Uh, and then 2 months later they change jobs. They go to a job, they move to another state, whatever, and then you have to start it all over again. So it's like wash, rinse, and repeat. You have to love them into constantly all the time and constantly monitor the environment. And it's like he said, your nominal hazard zone is the whole room. So if that's in a treatment area, that's a big room. If it's in a surgical area, that's a smaller room. That has a window. Does it have a door? Do we have proper signs up? Make sure that the signs warn people to walk in there. You must have eyewear on because there's a laser in use. So that's how I look at it. It's not all that terribly hard or scary. Our course is 2 hours long. It's good for 2 hours of CE credit. And it goes in both therapy and surgical lasers, and it goes in quite some depth on them. There's a lot of stuff in there that maybe you don't have to know, but once you understand it, it's easy to relate that and to teach that to your colleagues.
Yeah, I think from the practices I've seen that really gravitate this and make it an important part of the practice, they get a better use out of their laser, right?
Yep.
They really optimize the way it's used and the economic benefit of it, because there's a central hub and people start talking about it, and it just adds the culture. I think, David, you mentioned it's a culture of safety, and that resonates in other things that they might do. So let's kind of switch a little bit on the future. Like this part of this podcast is to really look at kind of lasers in medicine and where it's going. So any trends or innovations or advancements that you guys see or want to see of where lasers in medicine are going, David?
Oh, we typically follow the lasers, as I said at the beginning. We follow the lasers around, and we see new wavelengths coming, and new applications coming. And for me, that's a really exciting, right? I know there are now some wavelengths in the far IR that are being being used to treat acne, and which is a life changing. I mean, when it really works, it's a life changing treatment for kids who are struggling. Some of the energy delivered to the brain. I know there's some good studies that you're involved in, Brian, that are looking to treat real clinical depression and some of the neurological brain diseases that every family seems to struggle with now. And so for me, the excitement of those new frontiers, those new treatments, thrill me to no end. do I get to be a part of that a little bit, just being in the room talking about, well, what makes this safe? And I know we're looking at different kinds of eyewear now that needs to integrate with 3D imaging. So there are these treatments. There are fluoroscopy treatments, so urology treatments that use X-ray, and so we're working on some X-ray and laser safety eyewear. This new instance of 3D or polarized lenses for 3D imaging and laser are pretty interesting and kind of a hard problem to solve. There's some remote viewing opportunities with VR, like headwear that you actually don't look through, that has cameras to be used to be safely viewing the laser. And then in the industrial world, there's a lot going on with materials and laser welding and the like. So I just keep wanting those good scientists like you that do something new with a laser so that we can play in the same sandbox a little bit.
Yeah, it's a good point on viewing, right? Just because you're looking down a microscope doesn't mean you're safe from the laser.
Oh, you're almost worse, right? Because now you have some optical magnification happening. So as Ron said, 100 times when it enters your eye, who knows what power you're using in a microscope?
Yeah, you got to really make sure, even when you're using your camera phone to take a picture, depending on the wavelength, you could blind the detector because it sees different wavelengths. So that's another, thing to, when you're thinking about imaging a beam, think about this and, call David and others to see, do they have a filter or some other things for those devices? Ron, what about you? What do you see coming? What are you excited about?
What I'm excited about is all the new applications all the time, and I've constantly tried to push the envelope myself or encourage my colleagues to do that, because at first all we were treating was wounds. Every laser loves to heal a wound. That's easy. So then we went to musculoskeletal disorders. That's great. And then we finally figured out that, animals with renal problems, you can treat the whole urinary tract from outside the body, and very effective treatment. And then I share with David the thing about the neurological applications. I actually, basically treated a patient with a neurologist down in Columbus here that basically had Lou Gehrig's disease and unable to use his arms, unable to move his hands. And after 3 weeks of a pretty intense treatment, he was able to clasp his hands in the middle of his lap, which was just, a tearjerker. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. So seeing it being able to treat neurological problems that we were not able to have an answer for before, treating things that we didn't have a solution for before, is what basically gets me up in the morning and gets me excited. So, sports medicine applications. How can we help the athletes recover faster so they're not so predisposed to injury? That's a big one for me, because these horses, they basically, tear themselves up because that's what they're asked to do. That's their job. And if I can do it, that they can recover from an event and maintain that performance level all season without any pharmaceutical help or without any, being sure that we're not blocking pain, that they're basically can have perception on all their limbs and everything. That, to me, that's a home run. What is it worth to keep a player on the field, or keep a horse in training, or keep a dog in agility or in training? Or, how about the working dogs that we rely on with the police department and the armed forces? There's hundreds of thousands of dollars in those dogs. If we can help maintain their performance levels through routine laser therapy, why not? And that's a hard thing. That's a new thing, and that's a hard hump to get over. And I'm part of the way over it. I'm just not fully there yet. And I hope to do that before I finally ride off into the sunset. So that's what gets me excited.
Excellent. That's great. One question we try to ask all our guests is, what brings you joy, professionally or personally? Like, kind of share something with us.
David, you want to go first? I've got mine already.
Sure. Let's see. Obviously, some of the joy I find in work has come out in this really fun discussion. A couple things, absolutely, though, outside of work. Sharing time with those I love, period, right? Just having the opportunity to be with people that you love, family, my wife, my fam, it's just fantastic. If I can do that on a bicycle, even better, right? And so my friends and I ride. My partner and I will go bikepacking So in the forest, on a bike, self-sufficient for 4 or 5 days. That's there's hardly any better joy than that. And then I guess lastly, going to hear live music, right? Whether it's a little show at a pub or a giant concert, if somebody is taking the stage in silence and then produces music for me and the audience, that's one of my favorite things in the whole world. So those things, and spending time with my friends.
That's great.
Well,
Ron, what about you?
I'm not as broad or worldly as David, so my things that make me happy are a little narrower than what he's got there. I mean, he covered exercise physiology and joy of music and all those things. I do agree with the first one. I mean, family is all important, and my friends. I have some really good friends. I've been blessed by having good friendships, and everybody. I hardly meet a person that I don't learn something from, and I think that's one of the things that gives me a lot of joy. The other thing is that I gives me joy to watch a colleague of mine use laser for the first time and have a clinical result, because it's like one of those oh my gosh moments. And I do like that. And honestly, when I have, which is a lot lately, have trouble going to sleep at night, I'll just sit there and I'll think about all the animals in the animal kingdom, everything from zoological animals to the horses to even lasering things at SeaWorld and all these opportunities that I've had. I just think about how all the quality of life for the old dogs, the geriatrics, and everybody, how the quality of life has improved from being able to use lasers. And that's basically gives me a warm and fuzzy feeling. And I really enjoy remembering that almost on a daily basis.
That's great.
Excellent.
Yeah, this has been a great discussion, guys. We really appreciate kind of your insights, your thoughts on, laser standards, training, both, I think, on the medical side, David, where you see it from a lot of different, and industrial, which we're not touching, which is a massive market, which lasers are being used to produce things that we use every day, right? So we appreciate your insights on how we got here. Any last closing remarks?
Not me, besides thank you all. I thoroughly enjoy every time the three of us get together, and it doesn't have to be formal like a podcast. We always seem to have good discussions and learn something from each other. So
Yeah, I'm just grateful. And I mean, I guess the only thought I'd have is that if anybody does have further questions, you, of course, could make my contact information available to give somebody, answer a couple questions or what have you. But
Well, thanks very much, Ron. Thank you, David. I really appreciate the fact that what a lot of people see is an alphabet soup, right, of regulation. It's kind of meaningless, but I think you've been able to just take that and bring it down to, hey, this doesn't have to be burdensome in the clinic, regardless of whether your patients are four-legged or two-legged. It's a culture, right? It's a culture of respect for your patients, respect for your colleagues, in that you're using best practices to keep them safe. And you don't have to worry about ANSI or ISO or FDA or CDRH. You brought it down to a practical level that I think will keep everybody safe. So I want to thank you for that. And if anybody does have questions, info@aimla.org will be passed on to both of our speakers. That's aimla.org. And again, we thank you for your time today, and we look forward to the next podcast. And thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks, folks.
well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.